With the US, I think the government has embarked on achieving, in the short term, a damage limitation exercise, a surgical strike on the biggest sector that was suffering. It's not a full fat deal, nothing like it. But there are signs, it's not very clear and it hasn't been brilliantly communicated, that there may be a commitment to something that is bigger to come. I don't know whether that's people kidding themselves or faking it, but it may also be true. Certainly Jonathan Reynolds, I think last night I heard him saying that they are going to have a continuing negotiation, and the things the President was talking about bear no relationship really to the narrow arrangement to get the pressure off on autos. So either he's been briefed badly, or there is in actual fact an intention to go further. And if that's the case, then maybe there is something bigger in the offing. But I think that will probably take a bit more time if that's the case.
Okay, so Jonathan Reynolds, the Business and Trade Secretary, optimistic. But is the reality that maybe we're in a better position than before Tariff Day at the start of April, but we're still in a worse position than when Trump came in?
That's absolutely true. But, you know, I mean, the reality is what was going to happen to the auto sector in the UK was clearly going to be very damaging. So if you can get a bit of pressure off, that's great. I think it's a question of how you characterise it. So, I mean, I think that's successful to have done that. And in the circumstances, it's something that nobody else has yet achieved. So I think that's a plus, and it's a move in the right direction. But you're absolutely right. The real game is to get rid of those things, and not only to get rid of those things because they weren't there before, but to go on, ideally, and get a better deal. Now, I think there are some reasons why that may not have been possible right now. They're not being communicated at the moment.
But just speed, perhaps? I mean, is being first more important than getting the full deal?
Well, I mean, look... you know, I'm guessing. I have no idea. But I think you've got to look at the circumstances. We are the first cab off the rank, and there's a risk to both parties when you're the first cab off the rank. You know, frankly, I don't think the United States really is that bothered by the UK. Okay? But the United States, I don't see how the United States could, with its first deal, get rid of its 10% tariff. Because it wants to negotiate with other people. And as soon as it indicates with the United Kingdom that it can get rid of its 10% tariff, then everybody else is going to say, aha, we're sure, yes, that 10% that they've got, even that's not a flaw. So the US, I think, has reasons, not to do with the UK, but for who else it's got in the queue, not to move on the 10% tariff, unless they get given a fantastic biased deal. And I don't think the UK was in a position to give them that. So therefore, you know, if at this point in time, both parties, I think, would probably have been wary of going for the full fat deal for their own reasons.
What about the kind of misalignment, shall we say, on metals tariffs, different positions from the US and UK coming out of it? Do you read that as the US trying to use this as a negotiating ploy?
Yeah, I'm sure it's a negotiating ploy. Look, I mean, as far as steel and aluminium are concerned, I mean, you know, the UK is not a threat on steel. I mean, you may not have noticed, but you know, in actual fact, we've hardly got a steel industry left, and therefore there is no way that we're going to significantly impact what they're doing. So I don't think the steel thing, I may be wrong, but I don't think the steel thing would have been particularly difficult to resolve. There was a lot of hype around what it means strategically, and you know where you sit in terms of the China-US rivalry over metals. But as you can see, I don't think that one was particularly difficult. I think the autos was the one that the government presumably really wanted to get short term. So I mean, I'm not wanting to mischaracterize it, but I mean, I think at the moment it's an auto steel specific pain easing deal for the time being. But what you don't know is you know, what commitments have been made, if any, for what is going to happen in future. What the President seemed to be describing in the White House, to the extent you could follow the reasoning, clearly is something much bigger. I mean, he was talking about $5 billion. Now, you know, did he just pull that figure out of the air? Well, no, Lutnick had put that $5 billion on the whiteboard. So if you add up the value of what the UK has offered so far on ethanol tariffs and a bit of beef, you don't get to 5 billion, you get to 1 billion max. So there's another 4 billion lurking in there that the president seemed to think has been part of the deal. The only way you could get to that number is if you have a bigger deal across the board. And it seems to me quite clearly that that's what the US has kind of indicated it wants. But that would be a deal that dealt with all our tariffs and with a number of non-tariff measures. So I don't think that anybody would have been able to negotiate that kind of deal by today. And I doubt whether the UK government really would have been that interested in doing it right now while it's still got the European summit coming up.
Well, that's, I suppose, an interesting place to take the conversation next. You've had 2 wins in terms of headlines from trade in the past 2 weeks. You've got the UKEU summit coming up next. The CBI's Ray Newton-Smith was talking to us earlier about a hat trick, potentially, of deals. Does this set the bar very high for what needs to be achieved in what is the most important trading relationship for the UK?
I think there will be anything that happens with the EU will clearly be spun as a success. And one presumes that because there's been quite a lot of expectations raised, there will be some significant enough events in that. Again, I would be surprised if there's a massive shift in the dial.
What would look like a success to you? And
well, I mean, for me, they'll probably talk about what their intentions are on barriers in the agricultural area and in other goods. They'll obviously want to have something to say, about, if they can, about where they've got to on their youth mobility discussions. Clearly there'll be defence and security stuff which will be played up. Whether they've got anything else that they have hidden away, who knows? I mean, normally you would want to have something that was not foreshadowed, and I've got no idea what that would be. But that's not a bad package to be going on with a lot of positive oomph from both sides. It'll probably be a bit more coherent when the Commission talks about it than it was in Washington. But again, it'll be really positive vibes. So you've got 3 positive vibes. You'll have India, you've had Washington, which might have been a little bit overhyped, but still is positive. And you'll have the EU, which will probably be moderately positive, and it'll be hyped to being maximally positive.
But is there anything that we've already given to the US that would jeopardise deals with the EU or China?
I don't think so at this point. If what you're talking about is what is narrowly on the table, the ethanol tariff is probably okay. It's not going to be a showstopper. Having a tariff quota on beef for a moderate amount, which is all that's on the table, and I'm not quite sure whether that starts on day one or whether it's phased in, but either way it's not a showstopper for Europe. And what we've got on autos is certainly not a showstopper. And that's it. So none of that is a problem for what we do with the EU, precisely because it's so narrow. It's easing the pain of what the US had done before. And so therefore it isn't shifting anything on the dial as far as our regulatory arrangements are concerned.